I always thought there was something off about the old Starlight bowling alley. It wasn't just the musty smell that clung to the air, or the way the neon lights flickered as if they were sending a Morse code message from the beyond. There was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time I walked through its doors. It was a Thursday night, and the league players had just left, their laughter and clatter still echoing in my mind as I began to close up. I was alone, save for the company of shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing minute. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, almost like the sound of a bowling ball rolling down a lane, but not quite. I shook my head, chalking it up to the fatigue of a long day. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of pins crashing. I froze. Lane 13 was lit up, and the pin setter was resetting pins that no one had knocked down. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I approached the lane, my steps hesitant. The air grew colder as I neared, and I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of me. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and hollow in the vast space. There was no answer, just the soft hum of the machinery. I reached the scoring table, and that's when I saw the name on the screen. Asterisk, asterisk, Charlie. Asterisk, asterisk, my heart skipped a beat. Charlie had been a regular here, a bowling prodigy, until last year, until the accident that took his life. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. It had to be a glitch, a cruel joke. Anything but the alternative. But then the ball returned, rolling out of the machine with a deliberate slowness. It was Charlie's ball, the custom one with his initials carved into it. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I ran, the sound of my footsteps drowned out by the laughter that now filled the alley. It was Charlie's laughter, I was sure of it, and it followed me all the way to the door. I never went back to Starlight Bowling Alley after that night. They say it's still open, that people still go there to bowl, oblivious to the alley's dark past. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I can hear the faint sound of pins falling, and I know Charlie is still playing his eternal game. The days following my harrowing experience at the alley were restless. I couldn't shake off the feeling that Charlie was reaching out from beyond, desperate to tell his untold story. The image of his bowling ball, the sound of his laughter, the cold that enveloped me. It all felt too real to be a figment of my imagination. I decided to do some digging. I visited the local library and scoured through old newspapers, looking for anything related to Charlie or the bowling alley. Buried in a decade-old local gazette, I found it. A small article about a tragic accident during a regional bowling tournament. Charlie, the article said, had been on the verge of victory when a freak mechanical failure caused the pin setter to malfunction, striking him down in his prime. The incident was ruled an accident, a stroke of misfortune, but rumors had swirled around town, rumors of foul play, of jealous rivals, and of a curse that hung over the alley. I felt the chill run down my spine as I read the accounts of witnesses who claimed to have seen a shadowy figure tampering with the machinery that fateful night. Armed with this new information, I knew I had to return to Starlight Bowling Alley. I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront the past head-on. So, on the anniversary of the accident, I went back. The alley was deserted, save for the distant sound of thunder that seemed to grow louder with each step I took. I made my way to lane 13, the memories flooding back as I stood at the foul line. "Charlie," I whispered, "I know what happened to you was no accident." The lights flickered and a pin setter whirred to life. A single pin stood at the end of the lane, illuminated by a spotlight that seemed to come from nowhere. I picked up a ball and rolled it down the lane, watching as it struck the pin with a satisfying crash. The sound of applause filled the air, and I turned to see the seats filled with spectral figures, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. At the front, Charlie stood, his expression somber. "You freed me," he said, his voice echoing through the alley. "But beware, the one who did this to me still lurks in the shadows." Before I could respond, the figures vanished, and I was alone once more. The weight of Charlie's warning hung heavy in the air. I knew my journey was far from over. I had to find the truth, not just for Charlie, but for all the souls that had been trapped in the alley's sinister grip. The mystery deepened with each passing day. I couldn't shake the feeling that Charlie's spirit was not just bound to the alley, but also to me. His warning echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that the true perpetrator was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I began to notice strange occurrences everywhere I went. Objects in my home moved on their own, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling as if someone was watching me. It was clear that Charlie's unfinished business had somehow become my own. Determined to put an end to this haunting, I returned to the library and pored over every detail I could find about the bowling alley's history. That's when I stumbled upon an old photograph, yellowed with age, showing the original owner of Starlight Bowling Alley, a man with a stern face and piercing eyes. His name was Arthur Milbank, a name that sent shivers down my spine. I decided to visit the town's records office, where I discovered that Arthur had died under mysterious circumstances, not long after the alley was built. Rumors had it that he was obsessed with the idea of creating the perfect bowling alley, one that would be renowned across the country. But his dream never came to fruition, and his death had been the start of a series of misfortunes for the alley. As night fell, I found myself drawn back to the alley, as if by an unseen force. The building loomed before me, its windows darkened and welcoming. I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of waxed lanes greeting me. "Arthur Milbank," I called out. "I know you're here." The air grew thick, and a shadow detached itself from the darkness, taking the form of Arthur. "You've discovered my secret," he said, his voice a low growl. "I wanted to create a legacy, but they wouldn't let me. So I made a dark deal, and now I'm bound here, just like Charlie." I realized then that Arthur's spirit was the one who had cursed the alley, and in doing so had cursed himself. "How can I free you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. "You must break the curse," Arthur replied. "Win the game that Charlie never got to finish. Beat me, and we'll both be free." I stepped up to the lane, the weight of the ball heavy in my hands. I knew this was more than just a game. It was a battle for our souls. I took a deep breath and rolled the ball down the lane. It struck the pins with a thunderous crash, and I watched as they all fell, save for one. Arthur's laughter filled the alley as he took his turn, his form flickering with each step. He rolled the ball, and it was a perfect strike. The game continued, each of us matching the other, frame for frame. It came down to the final roll. My hands were shaking as I released the ball. It hurtled down the lane, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then the sound of falling pins broke the silence, and I knew I had won. The alley erupted in light, and I felt a rush of air as the spirits of Charlie and Arthur were released, their laughter and cries of relief mingling together. The curse was broken, and with it the hold they had on me. I walked out of Starlight Bowling Alley, the first rays of dawn breaking across the sky. I knew that the alley would now be just a normal place, but for me, it would always be the site of a true bowling horror story. I always thought there was something off about the old bowling alley at the edge of town. It wasn't just the way the neon lights flickered or how the wind howled through the cracks in its walls on stormy nights. It was something deeper, a sense of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach every time I walked through its doors. It started with whispers among the regulars, tales of bowlers who played the perfect game, and then vanished without a trace. They said the alley kept their souls, trapped in the glossy wooden lanes where their joy turned to terror. I laughed it off, after all. It was just a silly superstition, until the night I decided to play a game alone. The air was thick with the scent of stale beer and wax as I laced up my shoes. The sound of pins crashing echoed in the distance, a symphony of normalcy that did little to ease my unease. I approached lane 13, the infamous lane, with a ball in hand, ready to tempt fate. As the ball rolled down the lane, the atmosphere shifted. The lights dimmed, the rumble of thunder mingled with the sound of falling pins. and a chill ran down my spine. I turned to the score monitor, expecting to see my score, but instead the screen flickered and displayed a message. Welcome to the game, you can't leave until you finish it. I tried to laugh it off to convince myself it was a prank, but the exit doors wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized I was not alone. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and the sound of a ball rolling on the lane next to me sent shivers down my spine, even though I was the only one there. I knew then that the stories were true, and if I wanted to leave, I had to play the game. But as I bowled strike after strike, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. With each roll of the ball, the air grew colder, and the shadows crept closer. The once familiar sound of pins falling now seemed like a distant echo, replaced by whispers that slithered through the air. There were voices, I realized, voices of those who had played before me and lost. I tried to focus to keep my hands from shaking as I picked up the ball again. The scoreboard was no longer just numbers. It was a countdown, a timer ticking away to something I couldn't comprehend. I bowled another strike, and the thunderous applause that followed wasn't for the living. The alley had come alive, not with joy. The seats were filled with specters, their eyes hollowed, their cheers a cacophony of misery. There were the audience to my torment, and with each strike, their numbers grew. I understood then that I wasn't just playing for myself. I was playing for them to give them the show they craved. As the game neared its end, the pressure mounted. I could feel the eyes of the alley's true master upon me, its presence looming over the lanes. It was the keeper of scores, the collector of souls, and it was waiting to claim mine. With a trembling hand, I released the final ball. It rolled with a purpose, cutting through the silence before crashing into the pins. A perfect game. The specters erupted into an otherworldly roar, and the alley shook with their fury. But instead of darkness, there was light. The specters began to fade, their chains of eternal defeat breaking. They were free, released by the perfect game that had eluded them. And as the last of them vanished, so did the alley's hold on me. The doors swung open, and I stumbled out into the night, gasping for air. Behind me, the bowling alley stood silent, its lights extinguished. I never returned to that cursed place, but sometimes, when the wind is just right, I can still hear the faint sound of a ball rolling down lane 13. I always thought there was something off about the old bowling alley at the edge of town. It wasn't just the way the neon sign flickered ominously, casting long, sinister shadows across the cracked parking lot. Nor was it the strange, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the building itself, like the purring of a giant, slumbering beast. No, it was something else, something deeper that sent shivers down my spine every time I passed by. It was on a dare that I found myself pushing open the heavy, weathered doors of strikes and spares one fateful evening. The sound of thundering balls and crashing pins filled the air. But it was the silence between the noise that unnerved me, a silence too heavy to expect. As I laced up a pair of worn red leather shoes, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced around, but the few patrons were absorbed in their games, and the staff behind the counter seemed disinterested at best. Shrugging off my unease, I approached lane 13, the only lane left unoccupied. The first roll was a gutter ball. I chuckled nervously, blaming the slick soles of the shoes. But as I reached for another ball, a cold draft swept through the alley and the lights flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard it, a whisper so faint I thought I'd imagined it. Play with us? I spun around, but there was no one there. Just the echo of my own heartbeat loud in my ears. I told myself it was just the wind, just the buildings settling. I focused on the pins at the end of the lane, willing myself to ignore the chill that had settled in my bones. But as the night wore on, the occurrences grew stranger. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and the whispers became more insistent, more coherent. They spoke of a time long past, of a tragedy that had unfolded right where I stood, a game that had never ended. I should have left then, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something compelled me to stay, to keep playing, to finish the game. The game became an obsession, each roll of the ball echoing the whispers that now filled the air. Strike for us. They murmured, and I obliged, my throws growing more precise, more desperate. The pins fell with a satisfying crash, but there was no joy in it. Only a deepening sense of dread. I was alone, yet I felt the presence of others. Spectators to this macabre game. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, and the building itself seemed to close in around me. I could no longer tell if the pounding in my chest was from fear or something else, something that wanted out. As I approached the final frame, the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, all chanting in unison, "One more strike, one more strike." My hand shook as I picked up the ball, its weight suddenly unbearable. I took a deep breath and rolled. The ball hurtled down the lane, a blur of determination and terror. It struck the pins with a force that seemed to shake the very foundation of the alley. A perfect strike. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Then applause, soft at first, then growing louder, as if a crowd of invisible onlookers had been watching all along. I turned slowly, half expecting to see a throng of phantoms. But the alley was empty, save for the flickering lights and the lingering echoes of my own breath. I should have felt relief, triumph even, but as I looked down at the scoreboard, I realized the game was not over. There, in glowing red numbers, was a score that should have been impossible. 301. A chill ran down my spine as I understood the truth. The game would never be over. Not for them, the ones who had played and lost so long ago. And now, not for me. I tried to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, a player in a game with no end. The whispers returned, softer now, almost gentle. "Welcome to the team," they said, and I knew I would be bowling for eternity. The realization that I was trapped in an endless game was paralyzing. The once familiar sounds of the bowling alley now seemed foreign, as if I was hearing them from another world. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see the signs of age or decay, but they were unchanged. Time, it seemed, had no meaning here. I tried to scream to call for help, but my voice was swallowed by the void that the alley had become. The whispers were my only company, and they were maddeningly calm. "It's your turn," they cooed over and over. Days, weeks, months, perhaps even years, passed in a blur of strikes and spares. I was a prisoner of the lane, bound by an invisible force that demanded I play on. Other patrons came and went, oblivious to my plight. To them, I was just another bowler, perhaps a little too focused on the game. But then something changed. A new presence entered the alley, one that silenced the whispers and drew the shadows close. I felt a surge of hope. Would this be my salvation? She was a young woman, her eyes wide, with the same mix of curiosity and fear that I remembered all too well. She approached lane 13, and I knew I had to warn her, to save her from my fate. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I broke the silence. "Don't bowl, dear," I managed to croak out, my voice rusty with disuse. She looked at me, truly saw me, and I saw the recognition in her eyes. She knew the stories, the rumors about the cursed lane, but she had come anyway, thinking them nothing more than tales to scare children. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm someone who's been playing this game for far too long," I replied. "Please just leave. Don't get trapped like I did." She hesitated, her gaze shifting between me and the pins at the end of the lane. I could see the battle within her, the desire to flee warring with the pull of the unknown. In the end, curiosity won. She picked up a ball and rolled it down the lane. A perfect strike. The whispers returned, triumphant, and the shadows danced with glee. I watched in horror as she turned to me, her eyes now empty of fear of anything. "It's your turn," she said, her voice joining the chorus of whispers. And I knew then that the game was never just mine. It was ours, and it would never let us go.